You know what nobody tells you about being watched? It doesn't feel like attention, it feels like exposure. Not the kind you chose, not the kind you prepared for, the sudden kind. The kind that finds you mid-bite at a dinner table when the conversation dies and someone glances over and now you are a person who is chewing in public. And the mechanics of chewing, the jaw, the teeth, the thing you have done without a single conscious thought approximately 1 million times in your life, have become a production you are somehow actively failing. You put the fork down, you wait, you pretend you were going to put the fork down anyway. Nobody noticed. Almost certainly nobody noticed, but that's not the point. The point is that you noticed. And the moment you noticed, the whole system buckled, the automatic, the easy, the unconscious, it all went offline. And in its place arrived this horrible, electric, full-body awareness of being a person who exists in space. Who takes up room, who can be seen by other people right now, who is in fact being perceived as you sit here, and is there something on your face, and is that how your laugh sounds, and you're exhausted. You're genuinely exhausted, not from the dinner, from the management of it. That exhaustion is real. That exhaustion has a name, and it has been quietly running in the background of your life, maybe your whole life, and today we're going to look directly at it. Let's start with the body because the body is where this lives first, before the psychology, before the childhood history, before the narrative we build around it, in the body, in the muscles, in the wiring. When you learn something so well that you stop thinking about it, your brain does something remarkable. It moves that skill out of conscious control entirely. Locks it away in a system so deep it's practically a different brain. Procedural memory, the basal ganglia. A region that doesn't know what anxiety is, that doesn't read social signals, that cannot be embarrassed. Your signature lives there, your typing rhythm, the particular pressure of your hand on a pen. These things run clean and quiet and automatic until they're not. The neuroscientist Cyan Blaylock watched this happen in real time. She put skilled athletes, musicians, and surgeons under observation and watched their brains essentially betray them. Not because the skill degraded, the skill was intact, fully intact, right there, but because the act of being watched dragged conscious attention back to a process that had long since stopped needing it. And the conscious mind, reaching in with the very best of intentions, broke it, grabbed the steering wheel of a car that was already driving perfectly and sent it into the ditch. She called it paralysis by analysis. But here's what the clinical language doesn't capture, the feeling of it. The specific, horrible feeling of standing in your own body and watching it malfunction in front of other people. The feeling is not embarrassment, exactly. Embarrassment comes after. This feeling is more intimate and more terrible than embarrassment. It is the feeling of being a stranger to yourself, of your own hands becoming foreign objects. Of reaching for something that has always been yours, a skill, a word, a simple physical act, and finding that it isn't where you left it. That feeling has a specific emotional signature. Shame that arrives before anything shameful has actually happened. Pre-shame. The anticipation of failure is so vivid that it becomes the failure. You brace so hard against falling that the bracing is what trips you. And the worst part? You did it, not the watcher. You. The moment you felt the eyes land on you and your own attention snapped inward, that was the moment the machine jammed. The person watching you most likely hadn't even formed a thought about you yet. But you had already formed 17 thoughts about yourself, and none of them were kind. Here is something that will either comfort you or disturb you, depending on how you're wired. The moment that just destroyed you, the stumbled word, the ridiculous walk, the suddenly unfamiliar signature, almost certainly went unnoticed by the people you were performing for. Thomas Jailovich put people in embarrassing t-shirts and sent them into rooms full of strangers. Then he asked them how many people noticed. They guessed half the room. The real number was closer to 1 in 5. A study repeated in different forms, with different humiliations in different contexts, and it kept producing the same result. We are not being watched nearly as closely as we believe we are. This should be a relief. In most cases, it isn't, because the audience isn't really external. The audience is the one sitting behind your eyes, the one that has been there so long you've stopped noticing it. The one that never leaves the room, never puts down the clipboard, never stops the running assessment. Posture, voice, expression, competence, likability. The way you held that fork, the way your laugh sounded too loud just then, the way you took up too much space or not enough space. the way you got that wrong and didn't handle getting it wrong the right way either. That audience isn't made of strangers, it was never strangers. It was assembled over the years from people who were very close to you very early when you didn't yet have the equipment to question them. A parent's particular silence meant disappointment, a classroom that laughed at the wrong moment, a relationship that ended because you were, what was the word, too much or not enough. The critics who built the internal architecture are long gone or changed or were never as harsh as you remembered. But the architecture remains. The auditorium is full and the lights are on and the performance is always in progress. Psychologists call this the internalized gaze. The philosopher Michel Foucault called it the panopticon, a prison designed so that inmates could never tell whether they were being watched or not, and so watched themselves always, policed themselves constantly, became their own wardens. He meant it as a metaphor for society. For a lot of people, it isn't a metaphor at all. It is Tuesday. The tragedy isn't that other people are watching you too closely. The tragedy is that you are, and you are always there. You never look away, you give yourself no mercy, no privacy, and no moment off the record. You are simultaneously the performer and the cruelest audience you have ever had. And you have been doing this so long that you don't remember what it felt like before the camera was running. Let's be honest about the toll, not clinical, honest. There is a tax on every social interaction for people who live this way. A small but real deduction taken at the door. Before the conversation, there is preparation, a bracing, a quiet, rapid calculation of variables. Who will be there, what they think of you, what you said last time, whether last time went well, whether your version of last time went well matches their version, whether you will be able to be natural, or whether natural will desert you again the way it sometimes does, leaving you performing a convincing impression of a comfortable person. You arrive, you perform comfortably. You do it well enough that people who don't know you well think you are breezy, at ease, possibly a little reserved but fundamentally fine. What they can't see is the other track running underneath, the monitoring track, the commentary track, the one that notices every micro-expression on every face in the room and runs it through rapid, anxious analysis. Did that land? Was that too much? Why did they look away there? Am I talking about myself too much? I'm talking about myself too much. Now I've gone too quiet and that reads as sulking. There is no correct amount of self to bring to this room. You drive home and the debrief starts immediately. Unbidden, the replaying of moments, the improved versions of things you said, the cringes, the conviction that one particular exchange revealed something you didn't want revealed, exposed some flaw in the performance, gave the game away. You lie in bed at 1 a.m. and your nervous system is still running the tape, still finding errors, still writing notes in the margins of a conversation that is over and cannot be corrected. This is what it actually costs. Not just the fumbled walk or the forgotten password or the stupid signature. This is the real price, the aftermath, the depletion, the way social life, which should refill you at least sometimes, so often leaves you feeling scraped out instead. Like you gave a performance and left the performance behind and drove home empty. And you smile the next day when someone asks how the dinner was. Fine, you say, good, I had a great time. And the remarkable thing is, part of you actually did. The prison and the party happen simultaneously. The hypervigilance and the genuine laughter arrive in the same moment, and you learn to hold both, because you've been holding both for so long that you've stopped noticing how heavy they are together. We need to talk about the ones who seem to have solved this, the ones who expand under observation, the ones who get sharper, funnier, more alive when the eyes land on them, the social facilitators. The performers who use an audience like fuel, because we look at them and we think, lucky, wired differently, safe in a way I'm not, and that is sometimes true and sometimes the most convincing performance in the room. There is a version of rising under observation that is genuine, where the nervous system has truly learned that eyes mean energy, not threat, where childhood delivered enough consistent, unconditional regard that being seen doesn't require bracing, where the audience is experienced as warmth rather than verdict. These people exist. They're not a myth. But there is another version, quieter and more common, where the person who rises under observation has simply become very, very good at needing it. Where the performance isn't just something they do well, it's the only place they feel real. Where being watched isn't fuel exactly, but oxygen. Where the moment the audience is gone, something deflates. Where they find themselves in empty rooms, strangely formless, as if the shape of them requires the outline of other people's attention to hold together. These are not the same thing. One is freedom. The other is a different kind of cage, one that looks from outside like confidence. One that the person inside may not recognize as a cage at all because they've never experienced themselves outside of it. The cost here is subtler but just as real, an inability to be alone without restlessness. A private life that feels thin, somehow. A relationship with solitude that is less rest and more abandonment. The quiet room is the hardest room of all. There is no clean type here. Most people are some combination, rising in certain rooms, collapsing in others, needing the ambient witness on some days, performing for the empty room on others. The profiles bleed into each other. The point isn't to categorize. The point is to notice which room you're in right now. There is a way out of all of this, not a fix, not a cure, a way out. You've been in it. You probably don't think of it as connected to any of this, but it is. It's the afternoon you worked for 3 hours without noticing time passing. The run where the miles dissolved and you were just running, just movement, no commentary. The conversation was so real that you forgot to monitor how you were coming across. The moment in a performance, if you perform anything, anywhere, when the watching fell away and there was only the thing itself. Psychologists call it flow. Csikszentmihalyi spent decades mapping it. But the neuroscience is blunter and more interesting. In flow states, the default mode network, the part of your brain that runs the self-referential commentary, the part that generates the internal audience, goes quiet. Not suppressed, not white-knuckled into silence, just quiet, because the task has claimed all of it, because the challenge and the skill are so perfectly matched that there is no processing power left over for self-surveillance. The watcher isn't watching, the watcher is doing. And you are, for a moment, free. But here is the part nobody says out loud. You cannot force your way into flow. Every attempt to manufacture it, every "I'm going to get into the zone now," is the conscious mind reaching for the wheel again, and we already know how that ends. Flow doesn't respond to effort. It responds to surrender. To trust the body, the skill, the accumulated years of practice, enough to step back and let it run without you watching over it. Which is, of course, the exact thing that being watched makes impossible. The presence of a real or imagined audience reactivates the monitoring system. The surveillance re-engages. The watcher returns, clipboard in hand, and the flow closes like water is disturbed. This is why the question isn't how to perform better under observation. The question, the harder, more honest question, is whether the observer you've assembled inside yourself is one you would choose if you had the choice. Whether the voice running the commentary is one that sounds like care or one that sounds like a threat. Whether the audience in your head came from people who wanted you to be free or from people who needed you to be manageable. Because that internal audience isn't permanent, it feels permanent. It has the texture of something structural, something load-bearing, something you couldn't remove without everything collapsing, but it was built. And things that were built can, slowly, with the right kind of work, be rebuilt differently, into something that witnesses rather than judges, that watches with warmth rather than waiting for the error. You don't have to get rid of the audience. You just have to change who's in it, the walk down the hallway, the forgotten password, the signature that turned into a seismograph reading, the fork you put down when nobody was even looking. None of that was failure. All of that was your nervous system doing the most human thing it knows how to do, trying, constantly and desperately, to calculate what other people think of you, because for most of human history that calculation was survival itself. The problem isn't that you care what people think. The problem is that somewhere along the way you internalized a jury that never adjourns. That doesn't take weekends. That is present for the walk and the fork and the signature and the drive home and the 1 a.m. replay. That has never once looked up from its clipboard and said, "This is enough, you are enough, you can stop performing now." That jury wasn't born inside you. It moved in, and it convinced you over time that its voice was your own. The work, the real work, the kind that doesn't happen in a video, is learning to tell the difference between the voice that knows you and the voice that was installed in you. between the self that exists when no one is watching and the performance that is learned to run in its place. That self is there, it never left, it just got very quiet when the audience arrived. Maybe it's time to find out what it sounds like when the room is finally, genuinely empty.